I was in Christian Science and thought I think my ego was so involved, having felt powerless, I felt as though I had such power and control over my life, including my health, and that I had found some secret, because I had the healing from this ecstatic experience, that I continued in Christian Science. But I know now I had the wrong attitude. I was really protecting myself from life by feeling that I had a special secret to life. And at the same time, I was building a house in Westchester County, and it was just before my sister found God Speaks. I got gas gangrene from a thorn in my finger, and my life was truly threatened. It was another direct message from Baba that it really put me in a place where I realized Christian Science didn't work, mind games did not work. Telling yourself something intellectually was not the answer. And I was a quick study, I learned it immediately. I thought it was a correction, it was like a horse on a short rein. And I was cured, luckily, continued to build the house, and then this was November. My sister found the book in December, and by then I was so up to here in the material and legal and all aspects of building a house without any money. That was the real problem. And a really bad marriage. But I didn't see my own suffering. I just thought my sister was out of her mind, looking for a master. I thought if only she'd get a job or get something better to do or get a family. I had a child and a husband, more important things to do than that. And I had to be very serious about everything, and there was just such obligations on my part. And I sort of ignored this, but we moved into the house in January, and she and Henry and Keisha kept in touch while I was so busy with this project I had. But in the spring, I found a baby bird on the lawn, and it was a robin. And it looked injured, and I thought I could take care of it, and I brought it in, and my heart started opening up. I really was feeling this injured bird's suffering terribly. Not my own, not anyone else's, but the bird. And I was out to play God and protect all of nature. Nothing was going to get hurt around me. I was going to serve everything around me, the animals, my children. I was going to protect everything and everyone. And so I had the bird, and the Audubon was nearby, and they wanted me to join, and I went to them with the bird and wanted to know what I could do, and no one knew anything about the bird. So I started doing research, and we taped the broken wing, and we taped the broken leg, and we taped the other wing. And after a while, this bird was nothing but little splints and bandages. And of course, it identified me as the mother. It bonded on me of all things. So I took on a responsibility. I was not a bird mother. And here I was, I had created this monster. I had not let this bird be in the wilderness. I had the responsibility. I was playing God. And I had to send to California for surefire live worms. And you put them in the basement in a cool place. You sprinkle them with bran, and they eat bran, and as the bird needed food, I would go down and scoop out some worms, live worms, and feed it the worms. And one day the worms got loose in the basement. So I had to go about saving worms. And I was getting really in deeper and deeper trouble. I was getting in hotter and hotter water playing God. I mean, I just couldn't stand to see any suffering. I still didn't see my own. And I know that now that Henry had written to India and found out from Adi that Baba was coming in July. That had absolutely nothing to do with my life. And Liz couldn't even communicate with me about anything spiritual. I was in the dump of grossness. There was nothing else for me but what was happening there. And the bird kept getting worse and worse, and I would put it out for flying lessons. And it would fall out of the tree and break something else. And and it chirped when I came home, only when it saw me. And my responsibility got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then Baba came. But this was later in July. I think it was after Silence Day. I have not checked the Awakener, but my first meeting with Baba was sometime in midsummer, in July of 1956. And the Audubon said to me, there's a man in New York who knows all about birds. You've got to take the bird in there. He'll solve your problem. There wasn't a vet who knew about birds. People were not buying exotic pets at that time. Dogs and cats, yes, but a bird, no. And when Liz called me, and she was so enthusiastic, and I really could have just hung up on her. And she said, oh, I met this wonderful man in New York, and it was the most wonderful experience of my life. And I thought, no way could anyone have a good experience. And I met my master and all this, and I thought, what is she talking about masters for? However, I had been interested in masters in the earlier 50s, and I too was looking for a master on the subway, in the streets of New York, anywhere I was. But by then, I had given up on it, and I thought this was just a dream. So in order to please my sister, but more so in order to find a doctor for the bird, I was told, well, Baba did this directly. Someone called me 2 days before Liz called me and said, we just found the name of a man in New York who knows all about birds. As a matter of fact, he lived very near Phyllis's apartment. He had his little shop over on the East 70s. And so I thought, great. In those days, people didn't have money for dessert. We didn't have the economics that we have today. There's a lot more money around. There were no credit cards. If you didn't have $2 to go into New York, you didn't go into New York. You didn't put it on a card. You didn't borrow it. And, money was short. So I really had to have a good reason, a practical reason for going into New York. And it was on a Saturday. And it was a very warm day. And my daughter was 9 years old. And I took her with me. Thank heavens, her name is Deirdre. She's married to Bob Eaton, and they live in Myrtle Beach. And she met Bob also. But I had the address of the little Italian man in New York who knew all about birds, and I had a cage, and we went to the train station, and we got on the station and went to Grand Central Station with the bird and the child, and took a bus to the Delmonico Hotel on 61st Street and Park Avenue. And people on the bus knew what kind of bird it was. They said, oh, look at the robin, and what are you doing? And I would explain the story to everyone. So everyone did know what kind of bird it was. And when I walked into the Delmonico Hotel, I saw Adele first, Fred and Ella, Phyllis later. But Adele's eyes struck me. She was the first person I had met in my life since just one other person, and that was my girlfriend's mother, who was a Christian Scientist. And there was a look in her eyes that was different from everyone else's eyes on the street. And I really I never felt so comfortable. I never felt so warmly greeted with innocence. No one said, you'll have to pay $5 to come in here. No one said, where are you from? They greeted me as though I was a member of the family. They asked me to sign my name in the guest book. Adele especially said, oh, that's a bird. Baba loves animals and birds. You must take the bird in to see Baba. He loves all creatures. He loves all creatures. And I thought, well, that sounds fantastic. She set me up. She really prepared me. She prepared me. And I could let my guard down. Here was someone who loved everything. And I went and sat down. They had all these folding chairs in one direction, and I thought the wait would be long, but it was very quick. You were very well organized, and as Liz said, the room was an L shape, and Baba was in the foot of the L, in a tiny room, and the reception room was out front. And when they called my name, I had the bird cage in my left hand and my daughter in the right hand, and I turned the corner, and I have to say that I was quite a cynic. And my last thought of this kind was, what a cheap trick, they've got him all lit up. And I looked around like this. You know, I'm sure I made quite a great impression on Baba, and just looking around for the spotlights. And there were no spotlights, and when I took the second look, I had come home. There was nothing between us. We were one. He and I were the same self. I had come home. This is what I'd been looking for. And everything started disappearing. I started having that same, I don't know, experience where we were out in space and there was nothing around. And I bent over and kissed him. And I thought anyone looking at me would think I were kissing a stranger. And then I remembered the time I wouldn't kiss the priest's ring. And I said, he's no stranger. And the self, there was no male or female. You know, we sort of segue into each other. We may have come down hard on men, but it's because of the roles we're taught to play. I wasn't a woman. I wasn't a suffering woman. And Bob and I were one. As I said, I came home, and he looked at the bird and went, you know, so pleased to see the bird. And I knew it was perfect. He didn't speak. But as I bent over to kiss him, I think I started losing consciousness because everything disappeared and the ecstasy was back. And I heard this voice say, Baba wants you to take prasad. And I thought, who is this person? As I'm falling over Baba, crushing the one you, always hurting the one you love, as I'm falling over him, I'm going like this, go away. Go away. But of course, I recovered a little bit, and being halfway polite, I stood up, and he said, Baba wants you to take prasad, and Baba gave me a grape, and he gave Didi a grape. And at the same time, when Baba looked at the bird, I knew it was perfect he didn't speak, and that I wouldn't have to speak to him or ask him anything. But my silent question was, what is all this suffering about? I didn't expect an answer, but I laid it on him. I wanted to know what all this suffering was about. And that was it for the first meeting. Now, last year in India, Erich got the diary out, and you see how we hear what we want to hear. Erich got the diary out, and he said, oh yes, Virginia Glore. That was another name. Virginia Glore. Baba told you not to worry, to be happy. I now take that as a direct order. I didn't even remember he told me that, because I was set up to worry and not to be happy. But when I joined Henry and Keisha and my sister, I said a few stupid, inane things, not knowing about a master. He's adorable. I'll take him home, put him on a shelf. That big. That's so safe. But, I mean, I'd been taken home on someone's shelf. We all take each other's home, and we use each other as dolls or objects. So this is all I knew. And he's grown. I hope I'm the doll on the shelf. And he's the biggest thing in my life now. So that was my first meeting with Baba. Well, there's always a punchline. And I went on, we separated, and I had the important reason for going into New York was taking the bird to the Birdman. And so I got on the bus again. Again, everyone knew what kind of bird it was. And I got off the bus and walked to the filthiest little shop you'd ever seen. And walked in there. There were canaries in the window. And I walked in with this bandaged bird. He had white bandages all over him. And the first thing the man said to me in real New York talk is, what kind of bird is this? I mean, there goes that for knowing what's important versus what's unimportant. And so I thought that was the important part of my trip. Well, people often ask me, I'm not even going to let you ask the question, I'll tell you that they always ask what happened to the bird. It was not a miraculous healing. That's not necessary. I had to go home and realize that I was causing the bird suffering. It would have died naturally. I think one of the cats just broke its back, and that's part of life. I certainly contributed to its suffering. He could have died 3 months before and taken on another form within 48 hours. But the bird did get to see Baba. So I don't know how much in charge of anything I do. I don't think I'm in charge anyway. So I went home and I bought the discourses that day. And when I went home, Henry and Keisha and Liz came and visited, and we were in a honeymoon state. I don't know if you remember when you first heard about Baba, how you're 2 feet off the ground. And we also went over a lot of the discourses, and we were trying to figure out what plane we were on. Henry, to say the least, wanted the highest one. And I fought with him all the way on it. I thought I wanted the highest one. And we're very self-important. And you didn't come to a master because you were gross conscious. So, but we had a lovely, lovely time together, and it went on for quite a while. But the moment they left, I opened up the discourses, and the first thing I read was, the Baba said, we're responsible for 95% of our suffering. And I said, oh no, that's not true. I just could not. And so my entire life has been, I read what Baba says or hear what Baba says, and I always say, he doesn't really mean that, he's just saying it. Or that's not true. That certainly isn't my case. I'm not making myself suffer. People have often asked me too, is what answer did I get from Baba when I asked the silent question, what is the suffering about? There's no pat answer. There isn't a short answer. There's a lot of traveling we have to do. I realized when I had that first experience and then the experience meeting Baba that on some level we do know everything, and it's the time and illusion that it takes for us to travel through to unearth what we really know and throw away the illusion and throw away what we've been told we should know. And in all our hearts and who we really are, we do know it all. But the less we know of spiritual life, I think the more we act like know-it-alls. So there is paradox in this too. And I just had to be patient. But going over the 95% suffering, and I'm not talking about wars, and although maybe that's mass suffering, and that we bring it about from our culture. I'm not talking about that, but in our personal lives, when we're disappointed, or when we're in relationships where there's pain, or when we ask of life what's really not good for us, that is part of the contribution toward the suffering. But I found with myself, I was set up to suffer. Many of us were. We were trained not to be living from the heart, to be living from the mind, to be performing for a larger group, to be part of a culture, instead of to be human beings who are representing what's divine in them. And so this was part of my answer. It was the most tremendous gift. No philosopher, no education, nowhere in the world could I have found answers like this that filled my heart. And it was Baba. And it's just grown larger and larger in my life. Maybe this is what disillusionment is called. People are so afraid of being disillusioned, but this is, I want to be disillusioned. I don't want what I believed in before I met Baba. And I think that's about it. I'd like to have some questions. Yes?
Well, what would you say to young people who are just living in this time and have to deal with relationships in our time right now? It's just, what would you say to them about the importance you place on them?
I think, yes, I will. What would you say to young people today about relationships and the importance of, would you say Baba in your life, or of really being responsible for your own happiness, if you don't mind my paraphrasing? I would first say to young people, I have found a tremendous deal of suffering comes from judgment. And many young people and children start making fun of others. They start judging others. They start going into cliques. The result of that kind of thinking and that kind of treatment of others is that you start judging yourself. It works both ways. A dissatisfaction with others and with yourself is judgment turned around. I would say to young people to be tolerant and to also learn to love themselves the way they are. You cannot despise yourself and then get better. You're going to get worse. The love I got from Baba was unconditional. You could be anyone and anything, and if you loved Baba, if you recognized him in any way, you received that love from him. I know there were those who didn't receive the love. We have a cousin, actually, who's much older. We did not know he was going to meet Baba that day. There was no collusion. And we found out later that so there must be a family connection, but he met Baba. And I only saw him last year. He's in his 80s. And he said to me, "Do you still have anything to do with MeherBaba?" I said, "Of course." I said, "Do you really know who he is?" He said, "Yes, now I do." He said, "My mistake was I went to meet Baba expecting something." And so I would say to children today not to expect anything. There's a lot of judgment today, don't you think? School scores, making the best college, achieving, be somebody. I went to a bar mitzvah and the rabbi told the young man, don't be a nebbish, be somebody. He's telling this child he's not all right the way he is. This child has to be a credit to his group and to his culture. But if we accept every child, Baba did say accept every child. And if we accept every child, but we can't do it till we've accepted ourselves. And when you meet Baba and you've gotten that acceptance, you cannot anymore ever treat someone the way you've been treated before. You have to treat them, to try at least to treat them the way Baba treated you. The uniqueness was his total acceptance and his love. And coming home to your own real self. That for me was, there were no walls between us. So I would tell children, there's nothing really between us but the conditioned mind that we're given. And the competition today to achieve, even serving humanity, is from a selfish point of view. So I would tell children that they have to learn to love themselves and love others too. It will come, and not to judge. Yeah, anymore? Yes?
Having determined now that you have 95% of the responsibility for the suffering, has it changed that you suffered less, and if so, how did you stop yourself?
Oh, thank you. Having determined that we're responsible for 95% of our suffering, have I changed? Yeah, the proportions have changed incredibly. Tomorrow night when I speak, I will tell how my mind was stilled by Baba at Myrtle Beach. But I found that, number one, my expectations, my projecting onto life what the next moment would be or what should come to me caused suffering. My anticipation caused suffering. My judgment of what was right or wrong or good or bad that was happening to me caused suffering. My attitude toward what was happening caused suffering. I started that no matter what happened, I was going to ride over it or go like this and let whatever was happening go to the side. I refused to accept being dumped on or a painful situation or craziness or whatever happens in the world that makes us, you come in and you say, my God, I had such a terrible day at the grocery store and I waited in line or the woman was nasty. And what you do is just stop that mind and think of Baba and say, sooner or later I'll be out of this. Nothing stays the same forever. So if you're in a bad situation, you try to ride it out. And with Baba, remembering Baba and keeping him with me and having this feeling of Baba's love and not having to react too much. I also don't have to accept something that's given to me. It's in the discourses. If someone gives you something, you don't accept it. And that could mean pain. If they attack you and say, you know what, you're really stupid. I could say, well, that's their opinion. I know, I can be stupid sometime, but I'm also Baba and they're Baba. Words, intellect, relationships, what's expected of them. Guilt. Guilt is a terrible, terrible feeling. It's not conscience. That's feeling shame. That's suffering. When you do the best you can, even if it doesn't come out well, and you tell yourself, Baba still loves you. I mean, there are things you just have to work at. It's very hard to describe in a show, because I'm describing 30 years now, and that's hard to describe. Around the corner is something new for me. It always is. So, I don't know, is that a satisfying answer?
Yeah.
Because I could make up another one. Huh? You too?
We're version 2 now.
Yeah. Version 2? You're right. You're right, because words describe, the fact that Baba didn't speak was a message to us that words are not reality, they describe reality. So each one of us has to live our lives the best we know it. Always keeping in mind that Baba's there for us. We do have a safety net, which is that's a very special present.
Did you ever feel angry at Baba?
Oh yes, furious. Absolutely furious. I'm the kind who goes around like this, and I could see myself up in heaven chasing after him. Now, I don't know why you were arranging things this way or that way. And tomorrow night I'll explain what, something happened in 58. But also in my life now when I'm feeling badly or feel on the horns of a dilemma of being in a situation where I'm being told I'm selfish and, balancing acts in the world, or horns of dilemma will put you like that and make you angry, but you think Bob is putting you in a conflict. Yes?
Earlier, your sister said that you used to read a fair amount of psychological books.
Yes.
Read Jung, Freud,
Yes.
various others. Has that increased or decreased? And how have you integrated that with MeherBab?
Thank you. Oh yes, my sister had mentioned that I did a great deal of reading in psychology, in Freud, in Jung, and I don't remember if you mentioned anyone else, but I even went to Reich and just about anyone and everyone who came along. And it absolutely integrated, because I feel all of this insight is what Baba has released in the 20th century. I think you cannot forgive and you cannot love that easily without understanding. The mind does stand in the way, and Baba did tell us it's a balance of mind and heart. You can pretend you're loving someone. Somehow or another, when you're pretending, Baba continues to torment you with the same problem until you face how you feel. And I think that the new study of mankind's feelings and reactions to life is what Baba wants us to have. It's wonderful to have love and to have heart, but if the mind is not balanced with it, it still doesn't work. You can be all emotion and really mess up everything. There has to be the controls from mind and heart. And Baba did tell us at one time, he said, I will help you help yourselves. And it was a terrible muddle. You'd read the discourse and you say, well, how can I do it? Why don't I love this person? Why can't I succeed at this? Why is this not working out? And you didn't see the mechanics of it. And I know that Baba released this. Nothing is done without Baba's grace and will. Yes?
Baba said suffering was good for the soul. Is that major suffering, like physical defects or death or in the family, or what kind of suffering?
Yeah, I think it's that 5%. I really think it's what we cannot rescue ourselves from, because he also mentioned, how you can dwell on something that's happening to you and create a suffering and say, Baba wants me to suffer, and you can feel great about it. You really have to be terribly honest with yourself. I'm sorry, I did not repeat the question. Did everyone hear it? About suffering. Would you repeat that again? Louder?
Just the difference, the 95%.
The 95%, yeah, how I can justify the different kinds of suffering. But this is where you have to be discriminating. You can't deceive yourself. You can't say, well, I'm suffering because good for my soul. And then you turn yourself into some kind of martyr or some kind of spiritual pilgrim. And then your ego latches onto this, and then you continue the suffering. But why did Baba say, don't worry, be happy? Here we go again with a balancing act and the razor's edge. You can't take one thing that Baba said and act solely on it. You really have to take all of this and juggle. It's a juggling act, and keep them all going in the air at the same time. There's a lot of suffering we're going to have that we can't control consciously, or that we don't get ourselves into from desire. There's physical illness. There is, we can get into real trouble. Well, I don't have to tell you, we don't have to use imagination on it. The world is a hard place to live in, but we don't have to create our own suffering from desire and from need and from ego. and from an imagination that runs wild.
Did you write to Baba? There was opportunity.
Yes, I wrote to Baba, and there was a time when Baba asked for letters. And this is part of the spiritual journey also. I remember that I was running out of material, and I even looked in an album of an opera, and there was a lovely, lovely line that frankly I don't remember now. And I wrote that to Baba. He requested letters from us, and I wrote this little poem. And it came from a great deal of my own suffering, a limited human suffering. And then another letter I wrote, I was really desperate, and I loved fairy tales when I was a child. And my favorite fairy tale was The Little Match Girl. And part of it was a lot of self-pity, but some of it is a very true fairy tale. I don't know if you know it, but this little match girl is outside the cathedral on Christmas Eve, and she's in rags, and she only has an apple left and some matches, and she was selling them on the street, and all the wealthy people are going into the cathedral. Well, the self-pitying part was identifying with the poor little girl out in the street. I started there, but it ends up that the child goes in, and everyone else has money to give to the altar, to the Christ child that's up there, and the only thing she had left was this apple to eat. And she gave it to the Christ child. So it went from self-pity to at least surrendering and giving everything to the Christ child. But at the time I didn't know it. It was just my favorite fairy tale. And I sent it to Baba. Well, months later, someone wrote back or said they heard that Baba had that letter read out. He did not have the other one read out. And at that moment I knew that one had been an attitude, the poem from the opera was just poetry. You know how we get artistic? The other one came from the heart. And Baba knew more about me than I knew about myself. That the little match girl had been with me all my life, and this was the goal of my life, was to give maybe to the Christ child. I could almost cry now. It really touches me. And Baba knew it, and I didn't know it when I wrote the letter. Yes.
Did you have any difficulty obeying when Baba would give, special orders to be silent certain days?
Both. He wanted to know if I had any difficulty obeying when Baba gave special orders. I have to say one thing, that Baba was so gentle with me that he did not give me any orders. Knowing how terrible it is not to obey him, I couldn't obey. I didn't know what it meant. I really didn't know what it meant. I did love him as much as my love counts. But when it came to the group, and we had to do 500 a day, and we had fast days, and we had silence day, yes, I found I wanted to obey him. Later on, I felt a distance, and I felt not included, or it wasn't necessary. After Baba dropped his body, there were things, there wasn't a steadiness there. But I also realized in Myrtle Beach in '58 that if Baba had sent me for a glass of water, I'd still be looking for it today. That obeying him and being successful at it was his grace. That if he wanted you to obey him successfully, it was his grace that did it. That really, as a human being, I'm not capable. Yes?
Did you go to the East-West gathering?
No, I did not go. And I have mixed feelings. I stayed for human love, which was part of that 95% suffering. That was a mistake. But, I'm sure that all of you have gone through this, depending on how long you've been with Baba, that you'll take something and try it. And Baba will say that, that every human heart is my abode. So if someone says, I love you, don't go, you stay with them, and you serve this other, selfless service, you serve others. It's as though there's a whole tangle of strings in front of you, and you just have to sort them out. And it takes years to sort out what you really want. Baba wants you to know what you want, I feel. Yes?
In a practical way, how do you keep Baba with you now? You were talking about suffering, how you'll think, think of Baba. Are there other practical methods that you have to identify?
Well, frankly, if anything comes up where I don't even have to try anymore, it's such a pleasure. I think of him almost all the time. I live alone, or almost alone. I love being alone. I love manual labor. I don't like working in an office or doing mental work anymore, and I like meditating on Baba and having been with him. I speak to him as my constant companion. I trust him more than anything else in the world. I was going to say I try to be happy. I don't have to try. There is such joy. I cannot tell you the joy that comes from my heart at just being alive, and the fact that Baba was here with us, and that everything in one way is perfect the way it is, because it leads to him. And so all the time it's don't worry, and the moment I start thinking, I wonder how everyone is at home, I say that's a wrong thought. What am I going to do tomorrow? There is none of that thinking anymore, so that I'm so much freer. That caused me suffering too. Now is what matters, and now is very beautiful. And I find that even when a situation's bad, if it's in the now, you can handle it. If you imagine it and add it to the now, it's too much for the human to comprehend. I can't live in the future, the past, and now. And so I use Baba that way. I'm with Baba now. Yes?
Having grown up in a religious tradition that's long on ritual and tradition, could you talk a little bit about your feelings about that and
Yes.
how you relate that to Baba and prayers?
Yes, thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, having grown up in a religious tradition and having rituals and ceremonies and all, he asked me to talk about it in relation to Baba. And I did have the intuition or the instinct when I was a small child to almost despise church. Someone else may be more advanced and say, well, I knew God wasn't there, but I despised it. I felt tremendous pain in church. I thought it was so wrong. And there are more and more studies today as people are becoming more free of being controlled outwardly. They're coming up with the realization that church is a part of, it's an institutionalization of the original relationship that the disciples had with the Master. There is nothing ever to replace the relationship you have with the living Master. But a church and rituals and ceremonies is an attempt to revive those memories. You cannot attempt to revive through symbols. You have to live it. You have to live the relationship. It also has become an institution for controlling people. It had become political. I know I sense that. There's been tremendous suffering caused by the concept of church. Some people who have studied this matter consider it to be the end result of a kind of civilization that has been the age of reason or intellect. That in the future, when people can be, quote unquote, trusted, if human beings are, if the pedagogy is healthy and children are healthy and know love, and if we stop the competition, that, I shouldn't be talking about utopia. I don't think it ever comes about totally. But religion is, again, another way of controlling people and of having them under the thumb of a larger organization. It's a sad memory of the avatar, in my mind. It's all right to belong, and, Baba said to stay. There's no sense jumping around from religion to religion. I think this is why Baba said, stay with your religion. What's the use of thinking that if you were Catholic, if you become Protestant, you will be freer? It's still religion. Yes?
There's such a nice story of you were helping Anne Conlon go to India.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd be glad to. Anne was a visitor in my home after I came home from meeting Baba, I did get a job on a local newspaper, and I met Anne Conlon there. And she used to stop by my house twice a week at least to pick up the column. And she started coming by more often as I started talking about Baba. But she was a Roman Catholic, and this was the 50s, and she'd gone to Catholic University. So I tried to be very diplomatic about Baba, but I told her about this wonderful man I met, and I was still in the honeymoon phase, so a lot came through of the love I got from Baba. And Anne listened intently, but I never had the courage to tell her that Baba was Christ. And one day Liz came up from New York to meet Anne and to sit around the table with us. And Liz was in a hurry and just wanted to get out and didn't want to fool around. She didn't want to mince words. And she turned around and said to Anne, did Anne ask you whether, who was he? She just volunteered without being asked. And she said, he's Christ. And off she ran. I don't know if you took a train or if you had a car. She had a car and she just ran out of the house and left me with this Catholic. A Roman Catholic in 1956. And so we did go, I think I did get the timing wrong because Liz told her after the 58 Sahavas, so Anne never got to the 58 Sahavas.
No. She knew about Baba.
Did she know he was Christ?
She didn't feel like she loved him. So.
Oh, okay. But she didn't feel as though she could love him. I really always felt responsible that she hadn't been there in 58. Now I'm finding out the truth. Baba wanted her in India the way she went in 60. And all of a sudden there was a family letter one Monday night at Fred Nella's. And it said that anyone who wanted to come to India, I think the following, just that week, Friday or Saturday. And these planes took 2 days to get there. The tickets cost a few $1,000s in those days. She didn't have a passport. She'd never been anywhere abroad. And this was Monday night and Tuesday. We thought about it and Anne said, we said, you've got to go. You've got to meet Baba. Wednesday she took off, and it was Wednesday morning very early, and I picked her up and we took the train into New York to go to the ticket office, to go to the passport office, and we left very early, and I said, if we don't get your passport by 11, there's a train for Washington at 12, and it gets into Washington at 4, and we're going to get that passport for you or die. And we went to Air India, and when we walked in, we found out there was a flight leaving on Thursday. The timing was almost perfect, almost. She would, and if it weren't for Meherji picking her up in Pune, whatever happened was perfect. But we couldn't diddle-daddle, and I diddle-daddle about everything all my life. But for Anne, it was just so clear. For someone else, you could do this. And we went to the passport office at Rockefeller Center, and we walk in the door at 9 a.m., and she did have a press pass. And the wonderful thing was it was the Maharani of Baroda, and people understood that. So her boss said, of course you have to go. But when we walked in the passport office, she told him the problem, and he said, you have to have your passport this morning. You have to have it right away. It was as though he suddenly were veiled and hypnotized. He went into automatic and said, of course you have to have your passport. And we went to Air India, and there was a ticket, and we got the ticket. There were no credit cards then. And we managed to, thanks to my sister, who always knew well enough to squirrel some money away. And Liz had saved money, and so we had money for that, and got her the ticket. Couldn't believe the whole thing. This was on top speed. In those days, you just didn't pick up and go anywhere. You hardly do it now. My idea of traveling is when you can just go to the airport with your purse and go anywhere in the world and have the money and credit card it and everything. But in those days, this was a big plan that you had to make. And this was happening within minutes. We ran. Hadn't she dieted? Yes, she was slim, so we could run. We ran 20 blocks down the street, top speed, to Air India and got the ticket. And we were home and had all the plans made and took her to the airport for her flight to India, I think by Friday. And she got to India, and of course, I hope most of you have heard her story, because the rest of it's her story. And I've got to tell you, we didn't think we were doing anyone a favor. I was so relieved to dump her on Baba. I was so relieved. This was not selfless service. Give that up too. I was just so beside myself, trying to do what only Baba could do for her. And she was, she was more and more in need all the time of just meeting Baba, not me, every day around. And she was drinking so much coffee, she almost had a nervous breakdown once with coffee. She ended up at the doctor's office. Turned out she'd had 30 cups of coffee that day. And it was just, but Baba does get you into it. There has to be that frenzy to see Baba. And there was no selfless service, but the great gift from Baba was the cable that he sent and that someone told us later that Baba had tears in his eyes when he heard. And that, you know, Baba gave us so many gifts and made us gave me the gift of feeling that I was an okay person, that I wasn't all bad, you know. Always gave us that feeling that you were not bad, that you were perfectly okay, and as a matter of fact, sometimes wonderful. And after Anne got to India, there was a cable to us, and also later someone said when Baba heard that we did this for Anne, that he had tears in his eyes. And
Bob said something about such love for a friend.
such love for a friend. And it was such self-love. I said, Baba, please take her. It's so wonderful with Baba that each person, you don't have to be responsible for anyone. You don't have to be anybody's God. That each person has that direct line to Baba. I see each one as that direct thread to him, no matter how far out you are. And it takes away an awful lot of responsibility, false responsibility for people. So that's Anne.
A lot of the early people, like John Bass, wanted to be Mr. Interlocutor between us and Baba, and that you had to come to Baba through him. At the meetings, he always interfered, and it always reminded me of my father. And,
yes, there was an old thinking that you had to belong to a group, or you had to have formal, some people were still caught in that syndrome that you had to have a formal introduction, that this was some kind of organizational thing. You saw all types. You had to be discriminating and see also intellectually what was going on. That some people had groups, and only the group leader could make you come in to see Baba, and you just cut through it. You cut through it. And I didn't want to be Anne's group leader anymore. Yeah, anything else?
Did you ever take Baba to the workplace and tell people about him, or even with your spouses, did you tell them, and what response did they give?
Yes, thank you. Did I ever take Baba to the workplace or into the world? I feel that my whole life is to take Baba into the workplace or into the world or with spouses. And if they're not interested, or if it's even unpleasant for them, they tend to fall away. I'm quite diplomatic, sometimes wrongly so. I think the New Glow said that there's an honesty where you tell, you're diplomatic, but you also tell people what they don't want to hear. And for years I was afraid of telling people what they didn't want to hear. But, you're still careful, but my entire life has been in the hopes that I'm open enough that people come to Baba through me, that I'm an agent of one kind or another. And I do take him. But not blatantly so. I would not get a job and then put the picture up above everything. I'd have a picture on the desk or a small one, or, I would let the conversation come up. Anything else? You must all be very happy people. No problems. Yes?
I just wondered if you could address this, something that came to me recently with someone who loves Baba but has sort of been put off by some things that happened around them, and so temporarily, hopefully, this person is saying that because Baba lovers are so full of flaws and don't follow the discourses and let each other down, that they're put off by Baba, and they are put off by wanting to be with Baba lovers.
I don't know if you heard that, but someone who was maybe disillusioned with Baba and Baba lovers and was put off by the flaws in Baba lovers. I think it's a person's real mind game. I think that person is projecting. Our problem is not with anyone or anything else but ourselves. And you don't come to Baba through anyone else. You have that direct line to Baba. When I was in Myrtle Beach in '58, I realized that my connection was directly to Baba, not through Adi, not through Elizabeth, not through Kitty, not through anyone. Any one of them could become mentally ill, or a mind game or something, and say Baba isn't who he said he was, or this happened or that happened. That was none of my business. I didn't come to Baba through them. My direct experience was with Baba, and sustaining that experience, and it was my own inner reality of Baba. You also cannot talk about anyone else but yourself. You cannot say that person is flawed or that one. You're talking about yourself. The world is a mirror. That person is seeing his own flaws and doesn't like it. We're flawed. And the problem is with ourselves.
What do you do when you're disappointed in people you trusted?
Because I think that's part of the disillusionment. The only one to trust is Baba. You're expecting too much from others to trust them. There's no one else who can be God because they're not consciously God yet. And to trust others, I fell through, I was betrayed terribly. And I had to find out it was because I wasn't. Baba wanted us to have self-confidence. Every time I was around him, he added some more mortar to my being so that I had a stronger back, I had stronger self-confidence. When I first went with him, I didn't even trust my own experiences. I needed to share them with others. And then I had an experience with him in the barn where I realized that you experience life alone, basically. Who is your real partner in life? It's God. It's his higher power. Thank God we have it manifest in Baba. I could objectify it in him. Don't count on anyone else, and don't be disappointed in others that got clay feet. Like, it's wonderful also because you can forgive yourself now. If you don't trust others to be so perfect for you, you can also forgive yourself. You can do the best you can, but you don't have to torment yourself with constantly reminding yourself of your failure. You pick yourself up quickly and turn to Baba and love him again and say, next time. I like tennis because you get a new ball every split second. You just get another chance all the time. It's not golf, this is tennis. You get a new chance. Baba is forgiving you every moment. Every moment you fall down and he sends you a new ball. The forgiveness is there always. You don't have to test him all the time and see, will he forgive me this time? But it's just, most of us here are people who try very hard. They don't come to Baba without being people who aren't trying hard. Anyone else? Good. We can have lunch. A question, yes. Yes. Yes.
When this happens, whether people, there's a person that, like, seems to promise that they will always be there, and we're not. And it's like, wanting to be able to accept them the way they are, and understand everything you say, and then feeling myself automatically withdraw from the person, so you still have to love them. But something just withdraws because you're afraid to open up your heart and give it the woman. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, could you repeat it for me? I really can't. I could not hear.
Somebody really in, please.
Yeah, could you repeat that? How do you keep your heart open? By not thinking too much and not having these judgmental wheels turning, not describing everything to yourself, but by experiencing things. You keep your heart open by being kind to yourself, first of all. If you've been angry at yourself, your heart isn't open when you see someone else. You may just pass that feeling on to someone. How do we keep our hearts open? When you think of Baba and you're not thinking about, how am I going to get from point A on the freeway to point B? I can't handle this. If you get uptight about anything and try to plan ahead and control things ahead of you. I'm not saying you don't get up. There's a Sufi saying, leave everything to God, but first tie up your camel. I'm not telling you to get in a car with 4 flat tires. I'm telling you, you do your groundwork. I'm very practical. I take care of things so that they don't crumble around me, but then I let it go to Baba. I do what I can do and let Baba handle what I can't handle. And leave my heart open to others. If they betrayed me, I've betrayed others. See if you forgive yourself. I've done betrayals. I know it. Some of them have been conscious, some unconscious. I've been very angry at people. I've wanted to kill people. I've wanted to get even. I've had very negative feelings. I'm not a goody-goody. I think you know that. Takes one to know one. But that was another thing about Baba is not, we think of God as being this innocent white, but God is everything. Baba was everything. He was on every level. He knew everything about us. And he was that too, and not to be ashamed. But we're taught to be ashamed. That's another whole talk. That's group therapy right there. Did that answer your question? All right, thanks, but we can talk about it more later. And if you can't forgive someone, you can't forgive them. There's no sense pretending you can or that your heart's open. All right? Yeah? Finished?
Oh, no, here's some more people.
Oh, we have to start all over again.
One more question.
Yeah, one more then.
I just wondered if you had the same problem of projecting your father on Bob.
Not so much. I did have one problem that I'll bring out tomorrow, and that is, see, I was the older child, and so I carried a different role. I also must say before we leave that I don't want the men to feel bad. We're not man but male bashing. We're bashing role playing. We're bashing playing roles, and the men have been put in a terrible role. Yeah, women have been put in a bad role, and men have been put in a bad position. And this is when you start getting dogmatic and rigid about what human beings are. And Baba is not dogmatic. I'd like you to repeat that question one more time.
If it was the same problem of projecting your father on
not really. Baba was my refuge from the world. Baba was my refuge. Okay, Jay Baba?